Iraq, and yes, back on Twitter. The lead starts right now. Inaccurate tweets again. This time, a false claim about the nearly 1 million workers impacted by the almost week-long government shutdown. How long will it last? I'll talk to a congressman who has the president's ear. Plus, inconsolable. The mother of an 8-year-old boy who died in Border Patrol custody speaks out as questions mount about what happened to the little boy and how the government is trying to stop this from happening again. And indefensible. Russia touts a new nuclear missile that Vladimir Putin claims travels 20 times faster than the speed of sound. And the U.S. military can't stop it. The new Pentagon chief weighs in.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Dana Bash in for Jake Tapper. We begin this afternoon with breaking news in our money lead. Wall Street's wild ride. The Dow plunging more than 600 points at one point today before closing in positive territory. This comes just 24 hours after the index posted its biggest single day in history, this biggest single gain. So, Allison, it was up about 256 when it closed just about 90 seconds ago. Drastic swings once again. What are you hearing on the floor there?
Yeah, what a big comeback stocks are making. You know, you saw stocks literally erase a 611-point decline and then close up, talking about the Dow, up 258 points. That's an 800-point swing. So clearly this is a session that's been marked by heavy volatility. At first, the beginning of the day, we saw a big pullback after that historic jump in the Dow. And then we saw stocks come back as this turnaround happening, as investors are trying to square their books at the end of the year. There are just 2 more trading sessions in 2018. So there are heavy losses that have to be made up. So far this year, we've seen the Dow lose thousands of points since its peak in October. So what we're seeing is a squaring of the books so investors can close the books on 2018 with as much profit as possible. Dana?
You can finally unbuckle your seatbelt from this roller coaster ride today there. But I'm sure you'll be back at it tomorrow. Allison, thank you so much. And President Trump is back at the White House after visiting with U.S. troops in Iraq. And instead of expressing concern for the nearly 1 million federal employees who are working without pay or furloughed because of the shutdown, Mr. Trump is pointing the finger at his political opponents, tweeting, quote, "Do the Dems realize that most of the people are not getting paid are Democrats?" We should note that there is no evidence that federal workers who live and work all across the country, not just here in D.C., are mostly Democrats. Let's get straight to CNN's Jessica Dean at the White House. Jessica, we just learned that there are no votes scheduled, which means that the shutdown is most certainly headed into the new year and into the new Congress.
Right. We are just rolling ahead with this, Dana. And the president also tweeting today. He's been talking a lot about democratic obstruction. That's a term he keeps using over and over again. He keeps hitting on that border wall, talking about how the border wall is needed. He, of course, wants that $5 billion in funding. The Democrats wanting to offer nothing close to that, saying it's not needed for that border wall funding. And so you can certainly say they are here in a stalemate.
President Trump is back in Washington and back on Twitter. Less than 2 hours after arriving home from his whirlwind trip to Iraq, the president tweeted about the government shutdown, saying, "Did the Dems realize that most of the people not getting paid are Democrats?" The president of the American Federation of Government Employees, one of the largest unions representing government workers, pushed back against Trump's claim the shutdown affects mostly Democrats, saying, quote, "A government shutdown doesn't hurt any one political party or any one federal employee more than another. It hurts all of them." While in Iraq, the president repeatedly avoided directly answering whether he'd accept $2 billion for the border wall instead of his original $5 billion request.
I'm not going to talk about it now, but I will say this. We have been building a lot of walls.
Instead, Trump blamed Nancy Pelosi for keeping the government closed, despite him repeatedly saying he wants the shutdown to continue until he gets border wall funding.
But she's calling the shots, and she's calling them because she wants the votes. And probably if they do something, she's not going to get the votes, and she's not going to be Speaker of the House.
Pelosi does have the votes to become Speaker and is expected to take the gavel when the new House convenes January 3rd. As the shutdown drags on, the president also faces questions about his trip to Iraq. He was in the country for 3 hours, but did not meet with the Iraqi prime minister after their face-to-face was canceled due to differences over logistics. Instead, President Trump spoke with the prime minister by phone. Trump was met by loud applause as he spoke to troops, talking about their pay raise.
You know what? Nobody deserves it more. You haven't gotten one in more than 10 years. More than 10 years. And we got you a big one. I got you a big one. I said, no, make it 10%. Make it more than 10%. Because it's been a long time. It's been more than 10 years.
And we have a new statement from Sarah Sanders that just came in the last few minutes. I'd like to read it to you now. She says, quote, the president and his team stayed in Washington over Christmas, hoping to negotiate a deal that would stop the dangerous crisis on the border, protect American communities, and reopen the government. The Democrats decided to go home. The only rational conclusion is that the Democrat Party is openly choosing to keep our government closed to protect illegal immigrants rather than the American people. The president does not want the government to remain shut down, but he will not sign a proposal that does not first prioritize our country's safety and security. Dana, this political back and forth is certain to go on because we're headed toward the new year as well. We'll see what the president plans to do around that holiday.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy 2019.
Except those about 1 million people who are not getting a paycheck. So thank you for that reporting. We're now around the table with our panel. Doug, hi, I'll start with you because you were on Capitol Hill working for Republican leadership in the House during one of the more recent shutdowns in 2013. Obviously, different circumstances. But when you see a statement like this in particular saying that the only rational conclusion is the Democrats are choosing to keep the government closed in order to protect illegal immigrants, you say?
Well, I don't think that's the case. It reminds me somewhat of what we saw in 2013 in that there wasn't a real plan in 2013 for how to get out of a shutdown once we realized that was
2013, Ted Cruz forced the government shutdown over Obamacare repeal.
Exactly. And it was a fight within the Republican Party. And this, to some extent, is what happened this time, where Senate Republicans were ready to move forward on something they were told the president would support. And then all of a sudden, the rug was pulled out from them. So what we're seeing right now, I think, is a continuation of the same old reindeer games that we see in politics. It's really frustrating the American public right now, whether you're conservative or Republican, that things just aren't getting done the way they should.
So this is a Republican, Mona, saying that this is, again, a fight, a different issue, but a fight within the Republican Party. Obviously, that's a very different message, understandably, understanding politics, that we just heard from the president. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with him. I would say only this as a footnote to what you said, because I basically agree, but I would just point out that the Democrats might have a little bit of a danger for them, too, in terms of messaging. Nancy Pelosi has said things like a wall is immoral. I don't think that's the right way to view it. I think it's a waste of money. It's an absurd symbol that we don't need. There are many other things that we could be doing that would make a lot more sense, like visa overstays. Most of the people who are here illegally are visa overstays. They didn't come in over the southern border, like and so forth. Mona. And well, so that's the risk as I see it for the Democrats. For the Republicans, I agree that they have walk themselves into a box canyon here, especially because the Democrats are about to take control of the House on January 3rd, and they're going to even lose that leverage.
Dana, it adds insult to injury that 800,000 people, as you correctly pointed out, in the holiday season, people who possibly live from paycheck to paycheck, don't know where the next paycheck is going to come from, all because this president, after playing president for 2 years, you would think that he gets it. And that he understands that maybe I should own something, and since I have an agreement, let me move forward and not ruin Christmas for all these people. And to call them Democrats and say just Democrats, it's, the federal government is composed of everyone. So it adds layer upon layer of insult.
Well, let me just you mentioned the tweet that he said flatly that most of the people who work for the federal government who are furloughed or who are not able to come are Democrats. Mark Warner, Democratic senator who represents the state of Virginia, says this is outrageous. Federal employees don't go to work wearing red or blue jerseys. They're public servants, and the president is treating them like poker chips at one of his failed casinos.
Yeah, he's right. And I think the president is betting on two things here. Number one is he's betting on this idea that federal workers in general are not popular, that people want less of them, they want to cut government, right? And second, he is trying to keep us talking about immigration all the time. He thinks that's a loser for Democrats, a winner for his party. In fact, I would argue you are going to see this for the next 2 years, as long as he's still running for president. This is what he wants his reelection to be about. And so I think he sees this as a great fight to have. I think where this is going to get perilous for the president is, as you mentioned, he's been a terrible negotiating. I don't even want to call it partner. He's been terrible at the negotiating table. He's not just been unreliable to Democrats. He left Democrats at the altar once on this already, and certainly is doing it again. He's also leaving his own party. And the question to me is, at what point does this become such a stress on Republicans that they can't even rely on him? And when the Democrats come in and start hearings, we haven't even talked about what happened a little bit with this child at the border this holiday. When all that starts to come out and the president isn't a reliable entity for Republican senators and House members to rely on, I worry this is really going to start to crack.
And Doug, the other thing that I noticed that is, example number 732 of things that would be unbelievably met with unbelievable outrage if a Republican or Democrat did this in normal times. But just add this to the list. The Trump campaign is fundraising off the shutdown, over the wall, and actually offering donors to become a, quote, official wall member, and blaming Democrats for playing the, quote, political games as part of this political fundraiser, asking for money in and around the shutdown.
Yeah, it's not your grandfather's RNC anymore. It's not my RNC anymore. When I worked there in 2010, this would not be.
Is there any kind of backlash, you think, that the Trump campaign or the president himself will get for fundraising off of it?
He got it in the 2018 midterms when all of those suburban women and others abandoned the Republican Party, in part because they were offended by the tone that he took regarding the evil, immigrants who were coming, criminals in the caravan who represented this existential threat to the United States. That was offensive to a lot of Republicans.
And just was told that the House and Senate have now officially adjourned until next week, meaning pretty much next session. The pro forma session, which is literally pro forma today, lasted a mere minutes. So this is not going to end anytime soon.
No, and it's possibly not going to end well. And to answer the clip earlier about Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying that it's immoral, I'll tell you what, that we have a border problem. What we have is a humanitarian crisis. We should call things by their name. And what we've done is because we do not have an immigration policy in this country. Forget about a good one or a bad one. We just don't have one, right? So now you're calling this a security problem in the border. No, we do not have a security border in the problem. What we have is a humanitarian crisis because first we had a policy that was cruel. And now we have a policy that it's immoral, that you can allow two kids to be under the conditions in facilities that were never meant to basically be holding human beings for more than 72 hours. This is the problem that we're having. It's not really about the fence needed and what change or positive change that will bring to our immigrants in this country or to our own safety.
Okay, everybody stand by, because up next we have a Republican congressman, probably the most influential with the president on the things we're talking about, immigration in particular. He's going to be here live. We're back with our politics lead, and just moments ago, the House and Senate adjourned with no deal in sight to end the government shutdown. This afternoon, the House Majority Whip's office told members no votes on a deal are expected this week. Joining me now is a Republican Congressman, Mark Meadows of North Carolina. He is the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Thank you so much for coming in. Appreciate it.
Dana.
Where are things right now?
Well, obviously, over the last 24, 48 hours, things have not progressed. There's been a lot of conversations between rank and file members, not necessarily Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, but senators, House members with some of their Democrat colleagues. And it really comes down to this. Democrats are dug in that there's not going to be any money for the wall. We passed, obviously, $5.7 billion out of the House. And even the compromise that the administration, the president has put forth, a number of different proposals with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, have really fallen on deaf ears. So at this point, it looks like we could be in for a very long-term shutdown.
Well, you said the Democrats aren't proposing any money for the wall. You know that they had a proposal on the table for $1.3 billion.
Well, but even
That's
then,
not
I clarified that today because I wanted to make sure, knew I was coming on to talk to you. But even the $1.3 billion that they're talking about is really for fencing. It's not even for the wall. Chuck Schumer, you can listen to his words on the Senate floor. He said there will be no wall. He's talking about replacing fencing. And yet here we see the same Chuck Schumer that in 2006 voted for a Secure Fence Act that was 700 miles of fencing. And the same Chuck Schumer that in 2013 probably voted for that Gang of 8 bill that talked about border security. So, at some point, you have to understand that part of our immigration problem has to be addressing border security.
You're blaming Chuck Schumer here. You did it on Twitter earlier. But the Senate passed a funding bill. It was the House.
No money for the wall.
It was the House.
Yeah, but no money for the wall, Dana. And let me just tell you, it may be different in New York, but I can tell you the vast majority of Americans believe that a secure border and a secure community is something that is important to them. And to suggest otherwise, with caravans coming in, Chuck Schumer had $1.6 billion in the Department of Homeland Security bill just recently, and then all of a sudden they went from 1.6 back to zero. I don't think it's something that the president should support. It's certainly not something that House Republicans support.
And I don't think it's fair to say that the Democrats aren't proposing anything for
Well, what are they
security.
proposing, Dana? You cover the Hill. This is not your first rodeo.
No, it's not.
So what are they proposing? Are they willing to meet halfway? I think the president and his team offered $2.6 billion.
Let me just ask you this while you're on that. You are putting pressure, just so everybody understands, on the White House from the right. Would you be okay? Let's just say in this theoretical conversation, Democrats went for that. Would you be okay with 2.5?
Certainly the vast majority of Republican members of the conference understand that there may be a compromise between 5.7 billion and 1.6 or wherever the number may be. But as we're looking at it, whether it's 2.5 or 2.7, it doesn't matter. Chuck Schumer has said no, and the American people see that as a compromise. I see that as a compromise. And so certainly if that's on the table, you would find a number of Republican members encouraging the president to go ahead and accept that.
I want to ask you about something that happened earlier this year. There was a deal on the table, included $25 billion.
Right.
Now we're talking about 1.3, 2.5, $25 billion for border security, included the wall, in exchange for a number of changes to the immigration system and at least legal status for so-called dreamers, children who come to America illegally with their undocumented parents. Given where we are now, was leaving that on the table a mistake?
Well, I think given where we are today, it's all about trust. And part of that deal was about securing our border. And if the Democrats are not willing to put up even 2.5 or 2.6 billion, they were never serious about it. They were wanting the amnesty portion, but not the border security portion. And when you look at that, that's one of the tragedies of today, is if the Democrats are not willing to embrace some of the ideals that Republicans believe are important to secure our community, then how do they expect some of the Republicans to come along on some of the things that maybe are more for their constituency, whether it be dreamers or DACA recipients? And I can tell you that on a lot of that, there's been discussions even this week. Should we go ahead and allow for a short-term 3-year work visa for DACA recipients, the ones that the 750,000 or so people that signed up, so that it gives us a chance to work on that in exchange for the wall? Some of those discussions are happening even as we speak. And yet what happens is when you see this entrenched, no money for the wall, border security ever, it means that the Democrats are not really serious about getting a compromise.
So this is by definition how a standoff happens. You say they're entrenched, and they see you as entrenched.
Right.
So since I'm here talking to you, what are you willing to give up?
I'm telling you, there's a compromise between 1.6. Obviously
But I'm saying to get that money, for the Democrats to give in on that money, what are you willing to give the Democrats?
5.7 was a compromise. You mentioned $25 billion for the wall. 5.7 is just a down payment for that. But as we're looking at that, there's been a number of options that have been floated. Obviously, we can continue. We've made an offer of $5.7 billion. We passed that out of the House. Nancy Pelosi said there wasn't the votes. Indeed, there were the votes in the House to do that. So here's what we have to do. At some point, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and those that work closely with them have to come up with a counter proposal or not. And they can say 0 is the number, but most Americans do not believe that 0 for border security is it.
What are you willing to accept in such a counter proposal?
Obviously, the number that the president has put out there, or that has been reported that they put out. I haven't been in those rooms. I've had discussions, as you know, with the president and his team directly. Those numbers are in that $2.5 to $3 billion range.
But I mean, besides the money, take the money aside.
But we're talking about border security.
Okay, but
all
as part of
immigration reform starts with border security. I mean, at some point, if we go back to Reagan all the way up to till today, you have to secure your border eventually in order to have a legal immigration system that works.
So far, the Dreamers have, they're the Democrats. They don't want to be part of this deal. But if it comes down to it anyway, would you be okay with that? Allowing legal status for the Dreamers as part of this wall funding deal?
At this point, it takes a while to get wall funding done. Part of what Mario Diaz-Balart, who is considered to be more moderate on this issue than perhaps a member of the Freedom Caucus. He says that we have to start with looking at border security, and then we can look at legal status and
so
the
that's
like
a no?
for some of the other. No, I don't think it's a no. I just think that it's part of a process. You can't take one thing out and say, will you give citizenship to this group of people without looking at the other parts of comprehensive immigration reform?
Let's talk about the workers.
Sure.
People who are not working right now. Yeah. The New York Times talked to several workers, including one woman who works for the IRS. She doesn't live here. She lives in Wisconsin, a state the president won, I should add. And she said, we're all kind of waiting to see how we go forward. Do we apply for unemployment? Do we start looking for part-time jobs? And you're talking about, just to put numbers on this, 42,000 employees in the Coast Guard, 41,000 federal law enforcement officers, tens of thousands Customs and Border Patrol agents, the people who are trying to do exactly what you say needs to be done with the wall. They're not getting paid. Last week you said that, well, this is effectively said this is what you signed up for in a public service job.
In that interview, what I went on further to say is, listen, it's not lost on me in terms of anybody that is caught up in this particular thing. I can tell you, I was in the White House with the president and his team saying, how can we make sure that this shutdown has minimal impact on federal workers and minimal impact on those people on Main Street? And part of that may be to those essential employees that are having to show up, is to make sure that we fund them to make sure that they don't have to miss a paycheck, because some of those border security...
You'd be okay with that?
I would be okay with that. It's something that I've recommended that we look at. So it's only those that are truly furloughed, that are not working, not showing up to work, that you have to deal with. Now, it's not to minimize the impact on them as well.
Because you realize there are people out there, if this goes on, they're not going to be able to pay their mortgage. They're not going to be able to go to the grocery store.
It is critically important that we look at that. It's one of the reasons why I put in with the CAO to withhold my paycheck as well. I get that, and it's not lost on me.
Congressman Mark Meadows, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. The mother of an 8-year-old migrant boy who died in Border Patrol custody sends a message to the Trump administration. That's next. The national lead. For the first time, we're hearing from the mother of a Guatemalan boy who died Christmas Eve in U.S. custody after crossing the border. We're waiting for autopsy results for 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez. His mother is waiting for her child's remains. Let's go to CNN's Nick Valencia at the bus station in El Paso, Texas, where a lot of action has been taking place. Migrants are being dropped off. Nick, we've just learned that DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is going there to the border on Friday. And it seems like things are only getting worse.
They are, Dana, and it seems there's no end in sight. I talked to charities here in the area that are helping these migrants, the influx that has happened here over the course of last week, and they say they are completely overwhelmed, and they are not alone. A Customs and Border Protection official tells me that the facilities here along the border just aren't designed to hold so many people.
Inside this makeshift shelter, huddled around a table, a handful of migrants, some of the more than 500 just released from Border Patrol custody. Most of them don't want to talk on camera about what they've been through. But one of the migrants agrees, only if we don't show his face.
So you
paid to get out. How much of a bond did you pay? He shows us the paperwork they gave him as a receipt for his $10,000 bond to get out after 3 months in custody. He says he had to mortgage his home back in Nicaragua to pay for it. What do you say to people that think that you're criminals, that you don't have a business being in here in this country?
Así que no todos somos criminales, como le digo.
You have values and you have morals, and you're not here to, you're not here to do bad. You're not a criminal. The more than 500 migrants released in the last 24 hours were sent to a network of nonprofits, in part because the government can't handle the influx. Homeland Security Secretary Kristen Nielsen telling reporters family units can only be held for 21 days and are, quote, almost always released into the United States. Nielsen, who's headed to the border tomorrow to check on medical screenings of migrant children, also addressing the death of 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez, who died in Border Patrol custody, calling it, quote, deeply concerning and heartbreaking, but adding it's been more than 10 years since a child died in their custody.
I want them to bring my son here. I need to see him soon. I'm very sad that he died.
Felipe's mother, inconsolable, as she waits to find out how her young son died. The family now pleading with the U.S. government to return his body to be laid to rest back home in Guatemala.
They told us they were doing what they can to get him back, but we just want them to hurry.
And we're now learning that the autopsy for 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez could take between 6 and 12 weeks, leaving the Gomez family waiting such a long time to find out what officially happened and why their little boy died. Dana?
Absolutely heartbreaking. Nick Valencia, thank you for bringing us that report. And back here around the table, I mean, as a mother, as a human, to hear that kind of anguish from a mother about the death of your child is absolutely heartbreaking, as I said. But just on the policy side of this, or the practical side of this, I should say, do we really think that a man with an 8-year-old boy is going to be stopped and even trying to get over the border illegally with or without a wall?
Are we safer? Are we safer because we put that kid in inhuman conditions that contributed to his death? No, we're not. And this will continue. This is not a matter of resources. $21 billion goes into immigration enforcement, more than any other enforcement agency, more than the FBI, the AFT, the Secret Service, the U.S. Marshals. It's not about the money. It's about how we're using the money. And right now, the real crisis is in these people who came here legally and are petitioning for asylum. That's really our issue.
Yeah, and it's a manufactured crisis.
Yes.
This what just happened. First of all, let's step back here. It's the holidays. We're celebrating the holidays with our family, and a child just died. Children are being separated from their families, some of them permanently. And it's all a policy that the president put in place based on no good reason whatsoever. Illegal border crossings are dropping. Unemployment in this country is at a historic low. This is totally and utterly unnecessary, the entire policy. And you just heard from Congressman Meadows, all of this is built on lies. There was a caravan crisis before the election. Week after the election, crickets. We don't hear about it anymore. All of a sudden, we're bringing it back out again. We're not talking about the real issues. Russia's hypersonic missiles, $1 trillion deficits. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis of the government's own making.
Not entirely. Look, I tend to agree with you that a lot of this has been ginned up for political reasons. There's no question the caravan was a fraud, and I mean, a few of those people attempted to forcibly, cross the border, but most of them are waiting in Mexico. There was no crisis. There was no national security situation. At the same time, we cannot deny that over the last number of years, would-be immigrants have found out that you can claim asylum, and this is a better way of gaining entry into the U.S. than the previous efforts. And so it could be that we need to reform the way we do our asylum system.
Well, and why not address the humanitarian crisis in Central America?
Well,
the president's only making that worse.
As we've discovered,
people just trying to live their lives.
It is an extremely knotty problem. I mean, as we found out when we tried to reform Iraq and other parts of the world that aren't here, it's actually not so easy to go in and reform other countries and deal with humanitarian
But border
crisis.
crossings are going down. I mean, this is the point. Why is this a national
But that contradicts what you just said.
But I want to ask Doug about what a Border Patrol official told Nick Valencia, which is the following. We're overcrowded, understaffed. We don't have the manpower to deal with this crisis. It's a nosebleed that doesn't stop. So he blames the humanitarian crisis, on failures within the agency, but he also says that there's a major failure in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier. We don't have an immigration policy. That's I think both sides can agree on.
Not only that, we're not having oversight.
No, exactly. but I think we've learned, if anything, from President Trump, it's two things. One, he responds to video. Two, the only time he's ever stepped back on immigration was when he saw video of families being separated. Clearly, what we've seen with this child and his awful death is something that could cause the president to step back, because we saw not just how it affected his poll numbers, but we know that Melania said, you've got to put a stop to this. If this video gets played over and over again, that's where Donald Trump could pause on immigration again.
So this issue has become the Limbaugh, Coulter, Ingram shutdown, right? Because they're the ones who put pressure on the president to get tough again on the wall. He won't be reelected if there isn't a wall, and so on. But the child's death is. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But leave it on the pressure from the right wing that has caused him to.
That's obvious. That's why I wanted to talk to Mark Meadows. And the president, people privately who talk to the president, say flatly that this is in large part because not only does he talk to a lot of the people who he trusts on the right and on the Hill, he watches another cable network where they have hosts that you were talking about who are pounding him, stay the course.
Well, exactly. And I think it was his own daughter who intervened with him the first time that got him to change his mind. Laura Ingraham was what caused this whole government shutdown, apparently, in the first place. But I don't want to let Congressman Meadows off the hook either. This small minority of the House of Representatives, which, by the way, took a real drubbing in the election, right? They're coming back with a vengeance, and they're not telling the truth. I mean, Democrats said they were willing to spend this $1.6 billion. You hear him saying they won't spend anything. You hear him saying the Democrats oppose border security. That Democrats are saying that we support.
There's also a lot of slipperiness about that term, border security versus fence versus wall.
There's another question here that speaks to that. And Doug, you worked for the House Republican leadership. When are they going to say, you know what, it's okay to pass a bill without these Republicans and do it in a bipartisan way? The reason we're in this shutdown is because Paul Ryan, on his way out the door, heard from the president, I'm going to veto whatever the Senate is sending over. And so he decided not to take a vote. Well, at some point, you just take the vote, especially if you're heading towards retirement, right?
Yeah, I would say there are two answers to that. The first answer is never, in that we weren't able to do it before because we would not overcome the 50% rule within our own party. It's why in 2000, you remember covering the 2014 House Republican Conference retreat in Cambridge, Maryland, where we presented our immigration proposals to our conference.
I do.
It was about 45 minutes. We never talked about immigration for the rest of the year because our party within the conference told us not to talk about it again. But the other option is Donald Trump, if he wants to be the deal maker, his base will follow him on something like this or even on guns where he says, I'm not going to give up on the wall. This is a good deal. If Donald Trump wants to be the great deal maker, he's the one who can do it in a way that President Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio wouldn't have been allowed to.
I think you're right about that. I think you're right. Okay, everybody stand by because we do have a lot more to talk about and a lot of the issues that you mentioned, Robbie. Gas prices, they are down. Wages, they're up. Unemployment is low. So why is President Trump mostly focused? The money lead, another wild swing on Wall Street today with the Dow closing up. You see 260 points. That's after it took a nosedive earlier today. The close raised a question once again, what is going on and how much is the president's talking about this impacting the stock market? So let's talk about this. As we mentioned going into the break, the overall health of the economy is good. Unemployment numbers are good, all of the other factors. But this is a president who talked incessantly about how great the stock market is. He's a New Yorker. He's obsessed with the stock market. And, you live by the stock market, you die by the stock market, right?
Yes, exactly. So a couple points. One, the stock market is not the economy, and that's something that somebody should be drilling into him, although that wouldn't do any good on a daily basis. But the other thing to bear in mind is, yes, right now our economy seems strong. As people say, the fundamentals are strong. But we have been in this recovery since the middle of 2009. It's an unbelievably long time. Markets fluctuate, recessions do come. And the other thing to bear in mind is we are in a global economy, and Europe and Asia are seeing a decline in productivity and in their growth. So it's not out of the question that these fluctuations that we're seeing in our market are intimations of something of a downturn. I've
been told by somebody who talks to the president a lot that his focus, even before the market started to really take a downturn, two things: the stock market and gas prices. Focus as it relates to his reelection. And listen to what the Washington Post is saying, quoting some former Trump officials. The lower the market drops, the more the president worries that he is losing the most potent argument for reelection.
100%. I mean, this is the one thing that, when I didn't run a reelection campaign, but when you're running a presidential campaign, this is probably the most important factor. And in a reelection, it can literally be the difference between winning or losing. So I think I don't endorse his behavior whatsoever, but I think his worries are legitimate. I think he's doing more to make it worse, by the way. But absolutely, this is all about his reelection. And I think deep down, he'll never admit it, but his victory was so brittle, right? Losing the popular vote, winning 3 states by less than 70,000 votes. If we go in to next year or to 2020, people are losing their jobs, stock market's down, people are cranky, it's going to be really hard to get reelected.
Yeah, I think in terms of his base, I don't think they are necessarily paying attention to the market. And I think it'll be interesting to see what their reaction was going. We're not talking about people who don't zig when you're supposed to zag. Oh, my God. No, that's not really happening yet. When those statements come in and they see their pension plans take a hit, I wonder what the reaction will be, because I think that perhaps they're not paying attention to that, but the numbers will tell the story pretty soon.
Yeah, the thing I hear most from congressional Republicans is not so much complaining about what Trump tweets, it's what he doesn't tweet. And that's the first Friday of the month when we get good economic news, where Donald Trump can say at 8:31 a.m., the minute after those numbers come out, this is what I've done for the American economy this month. And he fails to do it almost every month. It really frustrates Republicans who want to be able to have something to campaign on positive when the president's
you're talking about somebody who should be a leader, and it's not.
But the weird thing is that, so now we're talking about the economy and how potentially perilous a downturn is in the economy for his reelection. And when he wasn't on the ballot, his focus was not on the economy, to your point. It was on immigration, which did frustrate Republicans, and then Republicans lost 40 seats.
Right. And the other thing he should bear in mind, though, if he's worried about the economy being a drag on his reelection, is the tariffs that he is so fond of are definitely something that's hindering the economy already. We're just going to begin to feel it in the coming year, most economists believe, the effects of those tariffs. And the other thing is that markets hate uncertainty, and his erratic behavior and his firing of people who are considered stable and responsible people in the administration, like Mattis, does not increase confidence in him. So to the degree that he's undermining confidence in his own government, that's bad for markets.
Well, and I totally agree with that. I mean, everything he's done has made this problem worse. I think the other thing to watch for is the more nervous he becomes about the economy, the more he's going to put out shiny objects to distract. His only path to victory will be to paint the Democrats as fighting for somebody, not fighting for you.
I would add
so he's going to use immigration to say, hey, they care only about undocumented workers. I care about you, and try to completely distract from economic problems. I don't think he's nervous
about the economy. I think he's nervous about his upcoming investigations. And a Democratic Congress should really have him worried. Even his own people would say that.
Yeah, well, I think he's actually got a lot to worry about. But, listen. The economy, the fundamentals are still good, and we should remember that. Everybody stand by, because we want to talk about an issue that Robbie was